Shabbat Shalom. This week we read Parashat Vayetchanan, as you already probably noticed. It's actually, the most perfect framing for Shabbat Nachamu. I cannot think of a better Torah portion to actually get us in the mood of consolation and understanding the history of our people. This Torah portion begins with an impassioned plea by Moses to be led into the promised land. And God basically says to Moses, no, not happening, don't mention it again, move on. And surprisingly, Moses just moves on. Which really, every time I read these lines, it causes me to think, would we be able to do the same? Are we able to just move on from things that happen in our life and never mention them again? It's hard, especially when it really affects you. Especially when you've been working for something every day of your life, or at least your adult life, or the life that you remember, and suddenly you can't see your work fulfilled or completed. But Moses obeys. And then the Torah portion that we read this morning is like a collection of the greatest hits of the story of the people of Israel, of the Israelites. Why? Well, you have the Ten Commandments, you have the Shema Israel, prohibition against idolatry, conquering of the land. But there are things that are missing from this Torah portion. And they're missing for a reason. Now, more than once, the Torah causes us to remember. It commands us to remember. Zachor, remember. When do we use that word? Interestingly, it's not used in this Torah portion. For example, the commandment to remember the Shabbat that we have in the Ten Commandments in the book of Exodus. Here, we have as shamor, observe, not as zachor. So there's a careful change in language. When the Torah enumerates all of the different peoples that we have to dispossess to take that land when we enter it, they're basically our enemies. There's one enemy that's left completely off the list, Amalek. And if you remember, it's going to happen in a couple of weeks from now, we have the commandments. Zachor et asher asa lecha Amalek. Remember what Amalek did to you. So again, we do not use the word Zachor. And in this Torah portion also, we have part of the Haggadah. It talks about leaving Egypt. It talks about leaving slavery. But it does not use the language of the book of Exodus. Zachor et hayom hazeh asher yatzatem mimitzrayim. Remember. Instead of using the word Zachor, it instructs us to actually go into a recollection of everything that happened so that we were set free from the burden of being slaves in Egypt. So the word Zachor is powerful, and it's not used. Why? I think that Moses in this Torah portion is trying as hard as he possibly can to use memory in a purposeful way. He's trying to tell the Bnei Israel, look, we can't dwell on memories forever, especially on memories that could define us. For example, the memory of Amalek. You would think it could be a center part of this Torah portion, but it's not. Right? It's missing from here. Moses clearly does not want the episode of Amalek to define us and wiping Amalek from under heaven to define us. And on Shabbat Nachamu, that's important to remember. We just emerged from the destruction of the temple. So the first step in being comforted is to let go of things that completely anchor us and do not allow us to be comforted in our life as we move ahead. The Sifrei, the Barim, which is a midrashic work of halacha of the early 3rd century, has an incredible phrase. Zachor b'peh, lo tishkach balev. Which means, remember, that's what you say with your mind, with your mouth. Zachor b'peh, remember with your mouth. Lo tishkach, do not forget with your heart. Remembering and not forgetting, there's a subtle difference. So, we as Jews have been through so many different things. Crusades, pogroms, expulsions, the Shoah. We could build our entire history and memory on tragedy, and yet we choose not to do it. Even after Tisha B'Av, even after the great day of mourning, we have Shabbat Nachamu. We read that beautiful Haftorah by Isaiah. Nachamu, Nachamu Ami. Rabbi Jonathan Sachs, who was the chief rabbi of the United Kingdom, once wrote that to be a Jew is to remember, but never to be held captive by memory. That's an incredible statement. It means really that our task is to remember the past without being burdened by it, but instead using it as a stepping stone for the future. We cannot let our past entirely rule over us. I have to tell you, it is during this time of the year that I start thinking about what I'm going to say during Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur. And there's a recurring thing that comes to my mind lately, which has a lot to do with social media. Over the past 2 years almost, we've been battling anti-Semites on social media every day. And some of us have posted things that we wish we wouldn't have posted. And that not only extends to our political lives, but it also extends to our personal lives. And one of the questions that I've asked myself is, how do you move into a season of repentance? How do you move into teshuvah when everything that you post online is there forever? How do you change your life when it's so hard to take things back? You can't. And that's precisely the context of Shabbat Nachamu. If you remember everything, you can have no life. One of the biggest vignettes I remember from my parents' house and living with them is my father and my mother sitting watching TV, talking about something that happened to them for hours to no end. And by the time they were done, that incident became even 3 times worse than it actually was. They egged each other on to no limits. And it just happened again and again. One of the things that I try to do in my own life is to move on from frustration. Because if you don't, you're bound to relieve that frustration time and time again. An interesting thing, this extends, by the way, not only to our national life as a people, but it extends to our family life. I'm going to give you 2 examples of my own life that I can never forget. And I try, by the way, as I think of these incidents, to think of the good things and not the bad things. As you heard me say a couple of Yom Kippur ago, about 25 years ago, 24 years ago, I had a little fight with one of my sisters. And I haven't spoken to her since. And this haunts me every day of my life. Believe it, every day I think about it. And I try to think about the good things to motivate me to one day maybe convince myself to try again. And trust me, I've tried. If I thought only of the bad things and I dwelled on them, there's no possible way to recover. Another incident that I remember of those crazy things that go on forever. When my brother-in-law got married, my wife has some family members that were seated at the wedding next to the kitchen. And they're some of my in-laws' best friends. They're cousins. And they didn't speak to my in-laws for a year because they were sat next to the kitchen at the wedding. This is for real. They're here, they won't let me lie. And this quarrel went on. Because how dare you sat me next to the kitchen? Seriously? Is this all we have to talk about in our lives and to dwell on? There must be a better way to live. Well, clearly there isn't. I mentioned last night, this is my 27th year as a rabbi of Temple Beth Shalom. Next year, it'll be my 30th anniversary of my ordination as a rabbi, which I cannot believe that we're already at 30 years. Trust me, it's crazy. I remember one of my first sermons, I was saying as a young rabbi, and Jerry Katz came up to me and says, Rabbi, stop saying as a young rabbi. You're a rabbi, young or old, you're a rabbi. Jerry probably doesn't remember that, but I remember that. Well, Jerry, I'm not the young rabbi anymore, so you've won. But one of the things that people ask me, especially my colleagues, because, of my graduating class, of 33 people, in those days we ordained 33 rabbis at a time at JTS, instead of 4 or 5. There's only 3 or 4 of us that are still in the same congregation for over 20 years. And when we're asked, how do you accomplish this? Because it's not easy, it's not for the faint of heart. How do you do it? And the answer is selective memory. Just like Moses. Selective memory. My father-in-law always says, that's why God gave you 2 ears, one to let it in and one to let it out. Because if you don't do that, you dwell in anger for the rest of your life. And there's no Nachamu, there's no Dechamta, there's no comfort that could ever comfort you. Yes, there have been times in my rabbinate where I fought with friends that I thought were my friends and turned their back on me. But trust me, I spent my life trying to forget that and move on. It's very, very hard, but we all have to do it. Because if we dwell in the horrible moments of the past, we will never move forward. Here is the basic suggestion of how to do this. Think of this metaphor. We as Jews have a choice. We can be remembered as the people that outlasted Pharaoh, or we can be remembered as the people that were always haunted by the pursuit of Pharaoh. It's our choice. It's an absolute choice. And it all depends on how you look at life. Clearly, we should choose the first option. We are the ones that outlasted Pharaoh. And we will outlast as however many pharaohs rise up to try to pursue us. There is no doubt. I have one last story to share with you. Some years ago, a young member of our congregation was afflicted with cancer. And it was a very, very aggressive type of cancer. So when she was finally declared cancer-free and she went into remission, she threw a party and she invited me to the party. And I went to the party and there was music and there was alcohol. I actually brought a bottle of tequila. It was incredible. People were dancing, people were laughing. And I noticed that on her refrigerator, she had a picture of her with no hair at a chemotherapy session with a nurse. And they were both smiling. So I asked her, okay, I get the party, but I don't get the picture. Why do you keep that picture of all the pictures that you can keep? She says, because I want to remember that even in the worst moments, when I thought I was going to die, there were people who made me smile. And that's how we have to approach life. Even in the most low of moments, when you think you can't get out, you can't escape. Zachor b'peh, al tishkach b'lev. That's how we live our lives. We as a people are really standing as the threshold of the future. We are going through a part of our history we have never seen before. And if we think we've seen it before, it probably will have a different conclusion, thank God. We have to choose which memories will guide our children. When one of the fathers of the hostages of Eviatar David was asked why did they allow the release of the video with their son looking like a skeleton digging his own grave, he said, because I want the world to see what Hamas wants us to remember of my child. But here's his picture. This is what I want the world to remember of my son. This is who he truly is, not that skeleton in that tunnel. So which memories are going to shape our priorities? How are we going to move into the future? That's a critical answer and a critical question. If we choose well, we will never be a people imprisoned by our past. Never. But a people whose memory is a living wellspring of faith, of joy, and of purpose. And if there's anything we take from Moses' words this Shabbat, is that your life is given purpose not by what you can no longer do, but what everything you've done that gives you power and faith to understand what comes next. Shabbat Shalom u'mevorach. Let us please rise. We're going to continue on page 184 with a Chatzi Kaddish for Musaf.